no words. I have the best words.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Best Words. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about the debt ceiling. What is it, and why is it such a problem? Well, the debt ceiling was punted on again for a few months, so we pushed off global economic catastrophe for just a few more weeks, and we're all supposed to be grateful to the Republicans. I'm not going to get too into the weeds of the play-by-play in Congress. That doesn't really interest me terribly. The point is, it's a problem that is not being dealt with on a fundamental level. So what is the debt ceiling? The debt ceiling actually goes back about 100 years. At the time, there was a statutory interpretation of the Constitution that said that the Treasury could not authorize debt. Therefore, the Treasury couldn't issue bonds without congressional approval. And instead of the Treasury going back to Congress every time they wanted to do a bond issuance, they decided that legally it made sense for Congress to raise a debt ceiling, and then Treasury could act up to that point, issuing debts, issuing treasury bonds without permission each and every time. So it was just sort of a workaround to deal with a statutory problem that they interpreted in the Constitution. Now, I don't think this is correct. I don't think you need to do that. Even if only Congress can authorize debt, Congress is authorizing debt via the appropriations process, right? Congress is deciding how much they're going to spend by virtue of writing bills that have price tags. So I think Congress has already voted to spend this money, which is why it doesn't make any sense to turn around and have Congress decide that they're not going to pay for the money they voted to spend just last year. The debt ceiling is kind of like the Electoral College, right? It's this response to a constitutional issue that for most of its life was a threat on paper, but didn't really materialize. So for most of the Electoral College's life, it lined up pretty closely with the popular vote. And now in the last few decades, because of American migration patterns, it's not uncommon to have a mismatch between the two. And all of a sudden we have a constitutional crisis. So the debt ceiling is kind of like that. For the first 100 years of its existence, it was non-controversial. Again, it was just a workaround to prevent Treasury from having to go back to Congress every single time they needed to raise bills, to raise Treasury bills. Well, what does it become? Well, you cannot have basically a nihilistic, power-hungry death cult as one of the two parties and give them this tool. The debt ceiling now is a tool for hostage taking. Because what are the ramifications? What are the ramifications if we don't pay our bills? Fiscal catastrophe. It's absolutely fiscal catastrophe. The idea that the full faith and credit of the United States would be defaulted on would have massive effects for us. I mean, look at the standard of living in Argentina versus the United States. A lot of that difference, a lot of it is simply the fiscal gravitas of the central government of one institution versus the other. The consequences to people on the ground living their lives in America, to our material standard of living, would be huge. And the Republicans know that. So they have, when Trump was president, he obviously ran up huge debts. We have Mitch McConnell on tape saying, of course, we're going to be responsible and lift the debt ceiling. And now here he is saying, we're going to blow up the economic well-being of the United States and the world to prove a point. Now, do the Republicans really want to do this? The answer, of course, is no. No, it'd be terrible for their donors. So why do we keep falling for this trick? They would pay a huge price, not just politically, but economically. The people that fund the Republican Party would arguably be hurt the most by defaulting on debt. But yet they are brazen, right? And they come and they threaten to default because they're taking hostages. And they know that the Democrats, who feel this burden of responsibility, will do anything to get the threat off the table. And they know that because they have established themselves as credible threats to do insane things, that they have to be taken seriously. Now, here in 2021, I think that's a mistake, and I think that's a mistake for a couple of reasons. One, they don't actually want to do it, right? Joe Biden did one of the few responsible things he could have done in reaction to this, which was he called a couple of very powerful CEOs to the White House and said, hey, get your pets in line, all right? We're not fucking around with the debt ceiling. Call off your dogs. This isn't funny. Deal with it. And corporate America called Mitch, and like an hour later, Mitch is like, we're going to punt on 3 months for the debt ceiling. No one actually wants to default. Which is why it's a shame that we respect them and their brinksmanship. And we should just call their bluff immediately and say, you're not going to do it. Your bosses at JP Morgan, your bosses at Goldman Sachs are never going to let you do it. So again, cut the crap. Now let's also look at the fundamental issue of why do we have a debt ceiling? Again, it was a response to a statutory issue in the early 20th century, a reading of the Constitution that the understanding was Treasury can't unilaterally raise debts without congressional approval, et cetera. It's a faulty reading. The appropriations process in and of itself is sufficient for Congress to authorize raising of the debt. So there's no need for a debt ceiling. And if the Democrats understand what's good for them, they will do two things. Do everything in their power to get rid of the debt ceiling. Next time when the Republicans, if there still is a debt ceiling, which there most likely will be, next time the Republicans threaten to blow up the world economy, Biden could do one better than putting a couple of CEOs in a room and telling them to call off Mitch McConnell. Biden can stand in front of on national TV and say, look, I want every American who's concerned about the full faith and credit of the United States government to call every single company that gives a penny to Republicans and tell them what you think about it. Biden has, in my personal opinion, failed miserably at using the bully pulpit. The American people are angry. We hate Republicans. There's more of us than them. We are tired of being held hostage by these nihilistic fascists who are afraid of nothing in the pursuit of seizing power. Biden needs to use the bully pulpit and make corporate America terrified to give money to Republicans who are supporting this debt ceiling bullshit. And since corporate America isn't going to stop giving money to Republicans, they're going to sit Mitch in a room and say, stop fucking around. The debt ceiling is not a tool to play with. And then buy ourselves some time to eventually get rid of it. It's an archaic, faulty reading of the Constitution, does not need to exist. Almost no other country has one. Denmark, I believe, has one, but it's set at some catastrophically high number, so there's absolutely no way for them to reach it. It's just a statutory formality with Denmark. No other OECD country has a debt ceiling because they have the proper reading of if your legislative body votes to spend the money, by definition, you're accepting whatever debts are accrued by voting to spend that money.
It's true. Yeah, I read a piece where I think Poland has a debt ceiling that's about 60% of its GDP, and we all know they're such a great country economically. We should definitely emulate exactly what they're doing. Yeah, the debt ceiling is such a bullshit topic to talk about because it only comes up when Republicans are out of power, and they could use it as an issue to kind of just take up the news cycle for a couple of weeks, and then we kind of just forget about it again. So, I mean, how many times did we raise this debt ceiling when Trump was in office?
Every
I don't
time
even remember.
to.
Yeah, you never even heard about it, right? Because it's like, yeah, duh, we're going to raise the debt ceiling. What makes it even dumber is that, yeah, you've already spent this money, so it doesn't make sense to not raise your debt ceiling. All you would be doing is creating an economic catastrophe in your country and probably around the world if you refuse to pay the country's debt. So it simply just doesn't even make sense on face value. I think Republicans use this as kind of an issue where people aren't quite sure exactly what's going on, so they might blame the Democrats, and they're always talking about debt. Democrats are tax and spenders, and they kind of just try to link that together. But I don't know why they keep using this as an issue, because I don't think that it works. I do think that most people see through it. I've seen a lot of polls, especially, I don't know so much about this debt ceiling increase, but in the previous ones where the Republicans just get blamed for it in the end, because people notice like, oh, you're kind of just using this as kind of a bullshit issue to push your narrative. But
yeah, I mean, I'd counter that by saying that, look, they bought themselves a couple precious weeks of this legislative session. They sucked the oxygen out of the room for a few more weeks of not passing what we need to pass while the clock's ticking on, midterms coming up,
Well,
etc.
yeah, I guess that is the Republican kind of playbook. They do try to tick the time clock down every time the Democrats get in power because the Republicans are so terrible. Even though the Democrats aren't good themselves, they just kind of try to run out the time and wait until the midterm until they can, gerrymander enough so they get enough seats back. But I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's a shame. I mean, luckily, the 2010 gerrymander was totally egregious, and population trends in this country have made it such that you can't keep repeating what they did in 2010. Plus, 2020 turnout was much better. So, yeah, the gerrymandering is a problem. Gerrymandering continues to be a problem with states like North Carolina, Texas, et cetera. I mean, I'm all for reverse gerrymandering, New York, Illinois. Fuck them, fuck them. It's a bilateral surrender or no surrender
Got to
at
fight
all.
fire with fire.
Got to fight fire with fire, but there's a limit to how much they can actually gerrymander post 2020 census. But it's still an issue. But the gerrymandering gets to the real point is that the bulk of the American people support one thing, and our institutions of government, especially the Senate, support another. And what tools do we have? The American people want reproductive freedom. The American people need government spending. We want infrastructure spending. The American people are afraid of climate change. Our positions, our policy positions are popular, and we can't get them through our archaic 17th, 18th century governmental systems. But what tool do we have that we are not using effectively at all? And that is the bully pulpit. I mean, I talk a lot about Lyndon Johnson, but really Biden can learn from FDR here, the fireside chats. Talk to people, tell them what you're trying to do, and also tell them what you've done for them. I mean, Chuck Schumer, has gotten pretty good at Twitter, I guess, but Twitter is not.
His aides have gotten pretty good at Twitter.
Somebody's gotten pretty, yeah. I think the threat of Senator AOC has scared Chuck Schumer into, whatever. It's brought his
that is a possibility.
Chuck Schumer back to life. Hey, Chuck has been consistent on canceling student debt, so I don't want to speak ill of him. But a well-timed tweet, a sick burn on Twitter. None of this is really the bully pulpit. Only a handful of people have the stature nationally, the gravitas, and the president is one of them, and he doesn't use it. He doesn't use it. I mean, if you leveled with the American people and say, this is what the Republicans are doing, this is the consequences of not raising the debt ceiling, these are the companies that you shop at that fund these shenanigans. Yeah, that's all he has to do. Like, our side is.
This was one of the biggest problems I had with Biden, because I didn't think he was up to the challenge when he won the primary eventually. I would have loved somebody like Bernie Sanders to win, but not just because he supports the policies that I support, but because he has the energy to do these things. Like, he would go to West Virginia and fuck with Joe Manchin. He would go to Arizona and fuck with Kyrsten Sinema if they're messing around, and they're going to fuck around and find out if Bernie Sanders is your president. But Biden, he believes in the system, and he's not really a fighter. It's not only that he believes in the system too, but he doesn't have the energy, or he doesn't support the policies enough. He'll say it at face value to get votes, and the Build Back Better plan, things like that. I'm sure he might believe in it at his core, kind of, but I'm not so sure that he wants a 3.5 trillion spending plan, because he's been very he's been a very Republican for a long time, very teetering the line of conservative Democrat. So
luckily for him, it's only $350 billion a year. It's not a 3.5 trillion spending.
Right. Which we should be saying. We should be saying it is $350 billion a year, because it's actually not that much.
The Pentagon budget we name annually, but for the infrastructure spending, yes.
Right. Of course you do. Well, that's like what I always say. We're terrible at messaging, right? The left wing is terrible at messaging.
Terrible. We're not terrible at messaging. Yeah. I think
right. We're okay.
But yeah, no, absolute failure to use the tools at his disposal. I don't even think he understands the value of the bully pulpit. We talk about him a lot as an institutionalist on the show. He really thinks that people of goodwill can gather in DC and get an optimal result without, channeling external pressure. And that is a fundamental, I think, fatal mistake. And all of our lives hang in the balance. So I hope he gets the message soon.
I agree with that. And yeah, he needs to understand that if he wants to get his agenda passed, he needs to do this quickly too, because the time clock is really running out. The Republicans are, always use that playbook. If they take back the Senate in a year, it's over. Nothing is going to get passed at all. We're just going to be sitting on another gridlocked government for another 2 to 3 years, and then who the hell knows what's going to happen in the presidential election in 2024. So you really got to make some big moves right now, or we're going to be completely fucked. Thank you.
No, I said before the election, I'll know if Biden is serious. If on day one, I'll know if he has what it takes, if he tries to push DC statehood. And if he doesn't try and push DC statehood, or he treats it like a secondary issue or a sideshow, he does not understand the scale of the challenge we're facing and the steps necessary to ameliorate those challenges. And he doesn't. Old thinking is going to kill us all.
Yeah, basically. I agree with that. Yeah. And you're right. There's so many issues like that that I've even kind of forgot to think about because I'm so worried about these plans that he can't get passed because of two asshole senators and us pretending that the Republicans are actually a party and not a complete death cult, just looking to completely destroy this country in favor of their corporate donors.